Welcome to this do's and don'ts watercolour tutorial for beginners. I'm going to demonstrate this simple seascape scene using just one colour, and I'm going to discuss all the do's and don'ts of painting this seascape scene in watercolour, and I'm only going to use one colour and there is no drawing. Let's get started. I'm using ultramarine blue. For a full list of all the materials I'm using, please see the description below. This is framing tape. You can use masking tape. I'm using a scissors and I'm going to cut out a small triangle and stick it on to the watercolour paper, which is a cold press paper, 300 grams. And I'm sticking the little triangles below the halfway line on each of my paintings. And what the framing tape will do, it will mask out that white area there, and it will look, when you peel it off later, like two little white sails. And it's a great alternative to masking fluid, and you can use masking tape as well. I'm using a size 6 brush, and I'm actually going to paint the don'ts painting first. I've been teaching watercolour classes for quite a few years. One of the mistakes a beginner makes, and they don't know because they're learning watercolour, so that's understandable. They don't make enough wash to begin with, and I've just made a little bit of a wash, and they always tend to use a small brush because they're afraid to use a larger brush because they may feel they're going to lose control using larger washes. The thing with a small brush, it doesn't carry very much paint, so you have to keep getting fresh paint and you keep running out of paint. So as you can see here, I'm trying to smooth in, and a lot of my students tend to try and fill in, and they go back and forth like you would with household decorating, and it's a completely different technique to that. And they'll keep sort of getting paint, keep going back for more. As you can see here, I'm getting all that sort of dry brush effect, and if you look at the top there, I've got little white speckles coming through. And then what they tend to do is make more paint, but it's not kind of the same colour. It's slightly darker in tone, or maybe too pale. And then they'll worry about those little white specks, and they'll cover those up with some of the dark paint. But the paint might be too wet, going into a drying paint. And then they'll sort of get more water. They'll put water on there to try and blend things. And what happens when you put that water on there, that's very watery. And the paint on the paper isn't as watery, it's drying off. And then they'll try and blend the top bit. And just to let you into a secret, when I first started in watercolour painting, this is exactly what I did. When I did my art degree, I was never shown how to use watercolours. I used to use acrylic paint. So it's all very new to me. But I really wanted to learn watercolour. I really want to show you what I've learnt in my journey. So as you can see here, when you add very wet paint to drying paint, you lose control. And what I'd like to show you here on the left hand side is how to maintain that control. So the first most important thing is to mix up plenty of paint, especially if you're working in a large area, and use a medium-sized brush. I'm also putting my paper now on a tilt, and this is to allow me to see a watercolor bead. So I'm using a large brush, and I've fully loaded that brush. It's really important to dip your brush right into that paint and start painting with a loaded brush, gliding your brush gently across the paper. Can you see that bead there I'm pointing to? You kind of want to see that when you're painting. This way you maintain control and you get a lovely even wash. None of that streaking that I've got on the right hand side. As you can see, I fully load my brush and go over that bead 50-50. So my brush is slightly above it and below it, and I glide that paint across that, not pressing too hard. So otherwise, sometimes when you press hard, you can get streaking as well. Fully load that brush and glide it effortlessly, hopefully, across the other side. And you can see why it's so important to have lots and lots of paint, and to have your painting on the tilt so you can see that bead. It allows the paint to run down so you can control it. Even though you're using lots of paint, you feel like you're not going to have the control. So I've added water to that wash now to lighten it so it gets paler as it goes towards the horizon, but the consistency is the same. I'm doing the same technique, taking my time. So it's all about preparation, having that tilt, large brush, and gliding that brush gently. Sometimes I'll start from the left and sometimes I'll start from the right, depending on what that bead is doing. And I'll wait for the bead as well, wait for that paint to run down. If you aren't getting a bead, maybe tilt your painting a little bit more. You want about a 20-degree angle. And if you're still not getting the bead, try loading your brush more and waiting. And I'm just using clean water now to go towards the bottom of the painting and really sort of gliding my brush so I don't have any paint at the bottom. So I'll rinse my brush, take the excess off on the paper towel and just collect any residue paint at the bottom so it doesn't leak later up into my painting to cause a back run. I think it's a good idea now to allow both paintings to dry. So what I'm doing now is I'm putting some framing tape across the sort of sea and sky there, pressing down the bottom part of the tape, peeling away the top part. So I've only got the bottom part stuck to the paper, and this is to give me a horizon line. So I'm going to work on the don'ts again first of all. I'm trying to get a dry brush effect, so I'm working wet on dry with the ultramarine, but I've not really done any preparation. I'm putting watery paint on, then thicker ultramarine, lots of water. So you've always got to have a plan ahead with what you're going to do. Otherwise you just get lost in your painting, and I haven't really painted up to the tape, so the horizon line won't be there when I peel the tape off. So here's the planning stage. This is what I recommend you do. I'm painting on the horizon area first. I've sort of loaded my brush with a medium tone paint. You can take the excess paint off with a paper towel, using this size 6 brush just to give myself a little bit of control because I'm painting the sea in sections. So horizon first with a light to medium tone. I want it to show up against the horizon. I'm also using a dry brush effect so you can get that lovely sparkle light on the water. So don't use a very heavily loaded brush. Maybe wipe your brush, the excess paint, on a paper towel as well to give that effect. So I'm using a mid to dark tone here, slightly darker in the middle of the water, adding a little bit more ultramarine so it's slightly creamier paint, still working wet on dry, using the belly of the brush sometimes as well to create that lovely sparkle there, and using the tip of the brush to create some movement in the water. But what I'm really trying to get across here is the planning of this, sort of working back to front, making sure I've got my horizon, bigger marks in the foreground, darker in the foreground, rather than getting lost, and maybe a little bit of marks just beneath the sailboat. And now I'm going to allow my paintings to dry. Once your painting is dry, you can remove your framing tape very gently so you don't tear the paper. Make sure it's dry. One thing you'll notice is that I don't have a horizon line on that right hand side painting, but the tape has come off quite nicely on the white sails there. So I'm painting the don'ts painting, and I've just mixed up a little bit of ultramarine, and instead of leaving a little bit of white there, I've just painted straight over the top. I find a lot of beginners do this. They sort of forget. So the white is very important to keep that light. So here on the do's painting, I'm painting on the left hand side, wet on dry with some ultramarine, rinsing my brush, taking the excess off and blending that sort of pale ultramarine paint into the white side, keeping that light. And if you lose it, lift it off with some paper towel. I'm just painting a little bit of dark ultramarine under each of the sailboats there, and I'm going to allow my paintings to dry once again. So I'm using a lifting off method to show the light reflections in the water. I know it's not there in the photograph, but I'm using a flat synthetic brush, but I'm using too much water and losing control, and the reflection gets bigger. So if you want the control, use the same brush, take the excess water off on a paper towel, line up where the sail is so you get it directly beneath, because it's almost like it's like a mirrored reflection, and just work very gently lifting off here and there. So I'm just sort of lifting off smaller sections, getting that control, not committing myself too much, really looking at the shape there. So it's wider as it's the top of the reflection there. As it comes away, it's thinner, and it's like a mirrored reflection there, and it's quite effective. And I'm also going to lift off some light sort of waves as well, here and there around the reflection area. Just a little bit of artistic license. Always keep cleaning your brush as well, so the water's really clean, lifting off until you're happy with the light that you've created. The paper's still stained. You don't want it too white. You just want that impression of the reflection of the sail in the water there, and keep lifting off the excess paint on the paper with your paper towel. So you saw that I was taking my time there, lifting off. Again, I'm using too much water on the don'ts painting. So it's all about control. So less is more. Planning really will give you more time and hopefully more confidence as well. So here are the two finished paintings. I've removed the framing tape to reveal a really nice white border as well. It's a nice way of presenting your work. I really hope you found this tutorial helpful in the do's and don'ts in watercolour painting, and the planning is so important as well. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section below, and if you'd like to see more tutorials like this, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel where you will get updates of my latest tutorials. If you'd like to learn more about watercolour painting, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about that can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.